This past week, I have been thinking a lot about and praying for my dad, who was pretty sick. He was stricken with Lyme's disease, and after some powerful antibiotics, which may have made him even sicker than the disease itself, he's doing a lot better, so don't worry, although prayers are appreciated in any event. But he is back at work, he's fine. But for a few days, it was weighing on me quite heavily, as I said, and as many of us tend to do when a loved one is sick, you start thinking about that person. You think about the many blessings you've had in your life through that person, especially a parent or a child or a sibling. And so that's what I was doing this week, even as we were in the midst of a very busy week preparing for the fall festival and the many other things that go on, just praying about my dad. And I recalled some very beautiful wisdom that he shared with me. Wisdom, if you will, from on high, as that first reading spoke of. There were several points in my life, usually pretty significant life milestones, first days of school, especially middle school, high school, and then leaving the nest and going to college. And I can remember even one time when my dad was going on a long business trip in a little form of a little note, he would speak these words, "Stay close to Jesus. Stay close to Jesus." Very simple, but in those words was everything. Those words are salvation. Stay close to Jesus. I remember hearing them sort of echo that first time I was at college and decided to go to Mass, the first time I really ever gone to Mass on my own, hearing those words, "Stay close to Jesus." My dad, a man of faith, was honoring that promise he made on the day of my baptism to keep me close to Jesus, to keep bringing me to Jesus. We had a baptism last evening at the 4:30 p.m. Mass, and I was so delighted that in the midst of our fall festival and this celebratory atmosphere that we could celebrate, especially with the scriptures this Sunday, the entrance of a child into the life of Jesus, into God's church, his family, to have that in the context of our communal celebration of the Eucharist. Listen to the words that the minister of baptism asks the parents at the beginning of the rite of baptism. Parents are asked, "You have asked to have your child baptized. In doing so, you are accepting the responsibility of training him or her in the practice of the faith. It will be your duty to bring him or her up to keep God's commandments as Christ taught us, by loving God and our neighbor. Do you clearly understand what you are undertaking?" The parents, of course, respond, "We do." So my dad, faithful to that promise, stay close to Jesus. Do you recognize your duty? Are you serious about the duty of bringing your children to Jesus? It'll be your duty. We don't often speak of duty when we come to church. I think by and large, the spirit of our times, even in the church, can be characterized as being kind of casual and laid back. Kind of a casual communal gathering. But the Lord and the church, who speaks in the name of the Lord, is talking about duty, responsibility, serious, heavy stuff. And thanks be to God, my dad has been faithful to that. In our gospel today, Jesus takes this child, he places it in the midst of the gathering in the house at Capernaum. And once again, we're struck by that immediate physical contact of Jesus, like we were a few weeks ago when Jesus touched the ears of the deaf man to heal him. The gospel says that the Lord placed his arms around the child. He gently but firmly placed that child in the midst of this crowd and embraced him. Now, a lot of times when we bring children into our presence, we kind of do the "get over here, say hi to this person." It's not what the Lord was doing. He was making, if you will, a sacrament of this child. His disciples had been arguing about who was the greatest. They were all wrapped up in the pride and vanity and things of this world. And so in order to cut through all that, the Lord takes this child and puts it in their presence and says, "Look at this child. When you receive a child such as this in my name, you receive not only me, but the one who sent me." Think of that in terms of the Eucharist that we will receive in a matter of moments. We don't just receive Jesus, but we receive the life of God. We receive the Father. He's making this child in its innocence and its purity a window to God, a source of God's grace. Children at the time of Jesus were considered little more than slaves. And so he's taking this child and saying, this is something that shows us God. He's affirming the personhood of that child and saying, this is a way to God. To look upon this child in its innocence is to see a reflection of God in the world. And that's our duty. That's the duty that the church is talking about. That's why we have to be so intentional, constant, faithful in bringing our children to Jesus. I was so struck by the opening night for our confirmation preparation that took place this past week. There was a beautiful spirit in the room. Parents and children, parents bringing their children to Jesus in this new way. What a gift, what a gift. I was just delighted to be there and just to mingle about in the crowd. It's a great privilege of being a parent or a godparent or a minister of baptism, that we bring children to Jesus. Jesus, of course, has ascended into glory beyond our sight. He's not here to literally take a child and put him before us. So in a very mysterious way, he leans on us to do that. That's the beauty of the sacrament of baptism. God has willed that it's our responsibility to bring our children into Jesus' presence, to let them live the life of Christ, the life of a Christian. Therefore, one of the ways we can really judge how well we're following Christ, the quality of our discipleship of Christ, is by how well we're doing with bringing our children to the faith. If we're not doing that daily, intentionally, as I said, then we're not really doing it at all, and in fact, we might even be leading them away. Because we all know we live in a time where there's a lot of evils, a lot of temptations, a lot of distractions in the world that lead us away from God. We know that well enough as adults. But if we're choosing things like sports over Mass, we're leading them away. If our homes are not houses of prayer, even if it's weak and feeble prayer, that's okay. If they're not houses of prayer, we're leading them away. If we're complacent about the kinds of media that we allow into our homes, we can be leading them away. If we don't keep an eye on what they're learning in school and talking about in school, in this age of moral relativism and skepticism about things like faith, we can be leading them away. Because God respects our freedom, He's not going to force Himself on us or our children. So He wants us to use that freedom to love Him, to bring our children to Him in freedom. The greatest gift we can give them, our children, is the gift of faith, besides life itself, the gift of faith. Again, in that baptismal rite, in the old days, if you will, that same question was phrased a little differently. What do you ask of God's church for your child? Parents would actually answer faith. That was the pre-programmed answer, faith. And what does faith promise? And the parents would respond, eternal life. Eternal life. To flip this around and put it negatively, which is never fun, but it's worth doing because it brings out the point more strongly. If we're not seeking that gift of faith for them, then we're not seeking eternal life for them. We've given them their natural life, but we have to give them eternal life. To not do that is to do them harm. And outside of letting our children not even survive the womb through the sin of abortion, this is the greatest violence we could do to them, because we could kill their souls and not just their bodies. We have to worry about our own souls too. Are we sharing the faith with our children? Let us be a people who totally, intentionally, consciously, daily are committed to sharing that saving faith with our young people in this age of casual Christianity, so that the Father's gifts may be ours in abundance.